The species in the human are Brucella militans, Brucella abortus from the cattle, and Brucella osseus from the pigs. So even this one you understand from the need point of view also, this is all significant for you. So whatever I'm talking now, so it's important from you from the entrance point of view also, very much inclined to it, and in your clinical practices also, this accounts a lot. Okay. So drinking the unpasteurized milk, contact with infected meat, infected milk products, skin mucosal surfaces via lymphatic bloodstream, distant foci, mainly vertebral bodies are involved here, and synovium of the larger joints by the brucellosis. So the gastrics of the chronic inflammatory granuloma with round cell infiltration and giant cells. So there is a central necrosis with caseating necrosis, abscess invasion. The clinical features are fever, headache, general weakness, joint pains, hip, knee, spine, backache, joint swollen, tender, movements restricted on all directions. Systemic illness follows fluctuant course, undulant fever. So X-ray shows subacute arthritis, loss of articular space, slow progressive bone erosions, periarticular osteoporosis. There is a spinal vertebral destruction, collapse of the adjacent vertebral bodies, and obliteration of the disc. So these are the clinical and the X-ray features which you find there. So the investigation for this is positive agglutination test, titer of 1/80 is a diagnostic, aspiration, biopsy, culture for the organism. So it can be tuberculosis, brucellosis, reactors, and differential diagnosis. Reactive arthritis. The treatment would be by the tetracycline, streptomycin for 3 to 4 weeks. Alternate regimen, there's rifampicin, and the newer cephalosporins can also be used. And the surgical procedure is the abscess drainage, orthodesis, orthoplasty after control of infection. So syphilitic arthritis, it caused by the spirochete treponema pallidum. Sexual activity, direct contact of infectious lesions on the skin and mucous membrane. Lymph bloodstream, placental barrier, fetal bloodstream, congenital syphilis. Acquired syphilis, primary, secondary, and lateral. So remember the organism causing it and the root. So the clinical features are early pain, swelling, and tenderness of the bones, especially with a little soft tissue covering, frontal bones, the antisurface of the tibia, sternum ribs. X-ray shows periosteosis and thickening of the cortex. Less common osteitis and septic arthritis. Late syphilitic gumma, dense granulomatous lesions are seen. There is a local bone resorption, adjacent sclerosis, pathological fracture, thick periosteal new bone, especially of the tibia. Tertiary syphilis, neuropathic joint, castically the knee is seen, tapes dorsalis. So congenital syphilis, early changes appear at several weeks, serological positive. Sick, irritable, hepatosplenomegaly is seen, anemia, skin lesions, joint swellings, pseudoparalysis, often symmetrical, slight swelling and tenderness of the shaft and the tubular bones is seen. And the X-ray features would be osteochondritis, metaphysitis, trabecular erosion, juxtaphyseal or tubular bones, first lucent band at the physis, later frank bone destruction resulting in epiphyseal suppression is seen here. So periosteosis is a diffuse periosteal new bone formation along the diaphysis. On and peel effect. Differential diagnosis would be scurvy, multifocal osteomyelitis, battered baby syndrome, or the Keffi's disease. And the late congenital syphilis, they resemble acquired, may be manifestations of the tertiary disease, result of gamma formation and endarteris. X-ray, the might appear at discrete, punched out radiolucent areas in the medulla or extensive destruction lesions of the cortex surrounding thick sclerotic. There is what you see typically is a sabertibia, the dense endosteal and the periosteal bone formation of the entire bone. Even this can be put as a picture for you in your need. The sabertibia, which is seen in the congenital late congenital syphilis or the syphilitic arthritis. So you can see the Hutchinson's teeth, dactylitis, blood on joints. Treatment early by the benzyl penicillin intramuscular weekly, and later high dose of penicillin intravenous for 7 to 10 days. And tertiary third generation cephalosporins have given. Mycotic infections, the fungal infection, superficial mycosis, Madara mycosis, Spothrosix, various species of Candida, Madara mycosis, bone and joint infected by direct invasion. Oh, record. Oh, record. Okay. Record.
This conference will now be recorded.
Half an hour. Screen you can visualize the screen. Right now, mucormycosis is going on in high frequency. I think you are getting around with mucormycosis.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So this is again the mycotic infection, the fungal infections. The mucormycosis, which is prevalent now, that is a opportunistic fungal infections. Because when the immunity is low, because of the infected water which we are using in the oxygen and AC guards, or even the construction site anywhere, this is present in the soil and everywhere, that mucormycosis. So when this patient immunity is low, especially in the COVID patients, X-ray cyst-like areas of the bone destruction, and treatment large doses of benzyl penicillin G, tetracycline, erythromycin for several months. Deep mycosis, histoplasmosis, blastomycosis, opidomycosis, rare on joint and joint infections, but found in the immunosuppressive therapy, osteomyelitis at unusual site. The treatment is amphotericin B, moderate effective, drain abscess, draining of the abscess and the removal of the necrotic tissue. So the parasitic infection of the bone, there is a hereditary disease, tapeworm echinococcus, common in the sheep farmers or the shepherds. Refractory host is the dog. Bone lesions rare, commonly affect the vertebra, pelvis, femur, scapula, ribs. Clinically, pain, swelling, pathological fracture, spinal cord compression. X-ray, there is a solitary or multilocular bone cyst, moderate expansion of the cortices. Cases, complement fixation may be positive, long-standing cases. So needle biopsy considered, and differential diagnosis. There is a benign or malignant bone cyst or cyst-like tumors. And treatment is by the albendazole, 12 mg per kg body weight, repeated at 4 times with 1 week in between for 4 weeks. And checking the liver, renal, bone marrow functions. So the next is the guinea worm. Dracunculiasis, most commonly known as the guinea worm disease, is a preventable infection caused by the parasite Dracunculosis medinensis. So this is a chart of it. How we get across this one. So when the human is consuming the infected water, by drinking the unfiltered water containing the scopopods, they are the small crustaceans which are infected with the larvae of the medinensis. Following the ingestion in the intestinal wall, enter the abdominal cavity and retroperitoneal space. After maturation into the adult and population, the male worms die and the females grow to a length of about 70 to 120 centimeters. They migrate to the subcutaneous tissues towards the skin surfaces. So this is consumed the copypods. Infected larvae consumed. In the intestine, they are forming they're releasing this larvae and they form the male and female. There is a copulation, the male die, the female grow to the length of 70 to 120 and they migrate to subcutaneous tissues toward the skin surface. So this is what you see. So that is why you should not let this take the stagnated water. Or mostly in the rural areas where they drink this infected water, they are prone for this. So people infected with the guinea worm by drinking this water from the ponds and other stagnant water containing tiny water fleas that carry this guinea worm larvae. So that when the adult female worm is ready to come out, it creates a blister on the skin, anywhere on the body, but usually on the legs and feet. The blister causes a very painful burning feeling and it bursts within 24 to 72 hours. Immersing the affected body part in the water helps relieve the pain. It also causes the guinea worm to come out of the wound and release a milky white liquid into the water that contains millions of immature larvae. This contaminates the water supply and starts the cycle over again. For several days, the female worm can release more larvae whenever it comes in contact with the water. So keep away this infected stagnated water. So smallpox arthritis. It was first described in the Chinese text in the 4th century. The vaccine was developed in the 18th century and the last case was seen in US in 1949 and the last case on the earth was seen in 1977. So it's a variola virus, orthopox virus, infected only humans in nature, mainly remains viable in the crust for years at room temperature, rapidly inactivated by the ultraviolet light and the chemical disinfectants. Currently, there is no evidence of naturally occurring smallpox transmission anywhere in the world, although a small worldwide immunization program eradicated smallpox disease and small quantities of smallpox virus. They officially exist in 2 research laboratories. One is in the Atlanta, Georgia in Russia. Okay, one is in the Atlanta and the other one in the Georgia in Russia. Before immunization, smallpox was responsible for the 10% of the deaths worldwide. It was a respiratory infection, making it readily spread. It was not super catchy, but if you shared living space with someone that had it, there was a 58% chance you could catch it as well. Now, same thing like this COVID, infectious part. Death from the smallpox was secondary to coagulopathy, hypertension, multi-organ failure. The worse the rash, the higher the chance of dying from the infection. If it didn't kill, there was a good chance it would leave you with secondary bacterial infections of the skin, keratitis, corneal ulcerations, leading to blindness, viral arthritis, and osteomyelitis, bacterial pneumonia, orchitis, and encephalitis. Smallpox has been eradicated globally by immunization programs since 1979. Okay, remember this from the NEET point of view also. So rheumatic fever is an autoimmune disease associated with group A B hemolytic streptococcal infection, in the course of which the patient develops carditis, arthritis, chorea, subcutaneous nodules, and erythema marginatum. Rheumatic fever diagnosis is based on the Jones criteria, developed in 1944, and then revised twice by the American Heart Association in 1992 and recently in 2015. Children aged 16 to 15 years develop the disease, most often at the same incidence rates among boys and girls. Rheumatic fever sometimes occur 2 to 3 weeks after streptococcal pharyngitis, never after streptococcal dermatitis. Always remember, it's after streptococcal pharyngitis. In temperate climates, the highest incidence of rheumatic fever is observed in winter and in the early spring. So these are the rheumatic fever. The major criteria are the carditis, polyarthritis, chorea, erythema marginatum, subcutaneous nodules. And the minor are the arthralgia, fever, and the laboratory findings of elevated erythrocyte sedimentation rate and the C-reactive protein. And in the ECGs, you find the prolonged PR interval. So you are supposed to remember this, because if you are getting across any children in the casualty or if you are treating any patients, you have to keep this in the mind of the rheumatic fever major criteria. Okay. So this is the Jones criteria. So this is again the picture, the chorea, involuntary movements of the extremities and the face affects the speech. Carditis, inflammation of all parts of the heart, primarily the mitral valves. Erythema marginatum, the red skin lesions starting on the trunk, especially peripherally. Polyarthritis, tender, painful subcutaneous nodules or the subcutaneous borders of the bones and the joint areas, especially the subcutaneous of the areas of the bones you find them. Abdominal pain occurs in some, and fever with history of sore throat, that is streptococcal pharyngitis. So this is again a picture explanation of rheumatic fever for you. So go to even this slide. So what all has been mentioned there, the major criteria, minor criteria. So the revised Jones criteria, major manifestations, carditis, polyarthritis, chorea, erythema marginatum, subcutaneous nodules. Minor manifestations by the clinical fever, polyarthralgia, elevated SR, ESR, C-reactive protein, okay, and ECG, prolonged PR interval, and supporting evidence of a preceding streptococcal infection in the last 45 days. That is elevating or the rising ASO or other streptococcal antibody or throat culture or rapid antigen test or group A streptococcus. Okay, keep this in mind. This additional. So the same thing here. The major, the minor. So I'm presenting it to you in the 4 different ways, in the chart way and the 3 pictures. The major criteria, the minor criteria, the investigation, the ECG features. So now see the septic arthritis. Septic arthritis is also known as a infectious arthritis or pyogenic arthritis. It's a serious infection of the joints characterized by pain, fever, chills, inflammation and swelling in 1 or more joints and loss of function in the joints. Septic arthritis is considered a medical emergency because of the damage it causes to the bone as well as the cartilage. Its potential for creating a septic shock, which is fatal, is a potentially fatal condition. Septic arthritis is an infection in the synovial fluid or tissues of a joint. Synovial fluid enables joints in the body to move without friction. In children, the infection is most common in the knee, hip, and ankle. In children under age 2, the hip is the most commonly affected. So septic arthritis can quickly destroy a joint and can cause many complications including osteomyelitis, bone erosions, fibrous ankylosis, sepsis, and even death. Barriers to successful management include lack of clinical suspicion in the early phase of presentation, delay in the definitive diagnostic needle aspiration, and failure to provide adequate drainage of the joint. In addition, septic arthritis in neonates and infants can be especially treacherous as a result of blunted inflammatory signals or confounding infection at distal site. Example is the ear, umbilical catheter site anywhere. The frequency of all the forms of arthritis, septic arthritis is the most aggressive at quickly destroying the joint. The frequency of septic arthritis is approximately 2 to 10 cases per 1 lakh in the general population. In patients with immunologic disorders, example rheumatoid arthritis or systemic erythematosus, the occurrence is approximately 30 to 70 cases per lakh. The incidence in patients with joint processes is similar to that of patients with immunologic disorders. In gonococcal arthritis, women are approximately 3 times as likely women to develop this disease, septic arthritis. So mainly the gonococcal arthritis is present as a septic knee. So that's why when you're taking a history, you should be elaborately asking about the sexual activity of the patients and exposure, even in the children who have been forced for childhood sex activities, like the most common in the African countries and also. So you should be seeing with the effusion of the knee, even this question you should not miss out. Or there any sexual activities or a gonococcal infection, because this is a straight cut different. The antibiotic empirical management differs directly. So the most septic arthritis cases are caused by the Staphylococcus aureus and Streptococci. In all age groups, 80% of the cases are caused by gram-positive aerobes, and approximately 20% of the cases are caused by the gram-negative anaerobes. In neonates and infants younger than 6 months, Staphylococcus aureus and gram-negative anaerobes compromise the majority of infections. The incidence of Haemophilus influenza has dramatically decreased due to widespread use of the vaccine. In children aged 6 months to 2 years, Staphylococcus aureus and to a lesser degree H. influenza are the major organisms of infection. In patients older than 2 years, aureus has become the principal culprit. As sexual activity begins in 10 years, the Neisseria gonorrhea should be suspected, as I told you. So septic arthritis can strike any age group, including infants, children, and adults. Is most commonly affects the weight-bearing joints such as knee, while in children is most common in the shoulder, hips, and knees. Risk factors include patient diagnosed with chronic rheumatoid arthritis, certain systemic infections, certain types of the cancer, diabetes, or sickle cell anemia, or systemic lupus erythematosus, IV drug abusers, alcoholics, and patients with artificial prostheses or joints. Patients with recent joint injuries or surgery, or patient receiving medication injected directly into a joint are also at a greater risk of developing septic arthritis. What does that mean is if you're giving an intraarticular injections by untrained personnel without keeping the hygiene, without cleaning the area cleanly with your spirit, betadine areas before you enter the joint, orthotomy or orthosynthesis you are doing, without proper instrumentation, sterile ones, the injection which you are doing without proper knowledge. So you can be infecting the joint and causing the septic arthritis. So typically women and male homosexuals are at greater risk of septic arthritis than are the male heterosexuals. So even keep this in mind. So the homosexuals and the STDs which they carry. This septic arthritis, the gonococcal arthritis. So the pathophysiology, the various sources of infection exist for the joint space. The bacteria may enter the joint directly, as with the trauma. Infection may enter hematogenous. Infection may enter from the osteomyelitis, that is adjacent to the capsule. Infection may also enter from the soft tissue infections. In infants and very young children, hip involvement is the most common joint infection. Shoulder, ankles, and elbows account approximately 10 to 15% of the infections. And the septic arthritis of the wrist occurs in 10% of the cases. So septic arthritis occurs when some type of infecting organism, most often bacteria, reaches a joint. Bacteria can get into the joint through the bloodstream or through surgery. An injection or injury that directly contaminates the joint. This causes septic arthritis in the babies and the young children. Is usually Staphylococci, Haemophilus influenza, and gram-negative bacilli. In adults and older children, septic arthritis is commonly caused by gonococci, staphylococci, and streptococci. Mycobacteria, which causes tuberculosis, and the bacteria that causes Lyme's disease can also cause septic arthritis. Intravenous drug users and people with disease that weaken the immune system, such as the HIV, are most likely to have septic arthritis caused by gram-negative bacteria. The Staphylococcus organism can be introduced to a joint during arthroscopic surgery and prosthetic joint surgery. So these things have to be kept in mind right from the infants, the newborns, to the old age group. Anywhere there is a chances of the septic arthritis, the common organism is Staphylococcus there. Okay, in the children, because of the vaccination, the H influenza is come down, and other common will be the mycobacteria or the gonococcal or the streptococcal also, and they can be introduced because of the surgical procedures like arthroscopy or the arthroplasty or any other surgical procedures near the joint when the arthrotomy is done, or arthrocentesis or intraarticular injections which are given. This all can cause the septic arthritis. That should be kept in your mind. And the bacteria, the viruses, or the fungi that have entered the joint through an open wound or have traveled through the bloodstream from an infection elsewhere in the body cause septic arthritis. In more than half of the cases, Staphylococcus aureus is the culprit there. In children between the ages of months to 4 years, H influenza may be the culprit because the earlier studies. So right now that has come down. A puncture wound or even a needle may be also be the cause of infection. That should be kept in your mind there. The symptoms of the septic arthritis are occur sudden and are characterized by severe pain, swelling in the affected joint, common symptoms. Septic arthritis in the hip may be experienced as pain in the groin area that becomes much worse if the patient tries to walk. In the majority of the cases, there is some leakage of the tissue fluid into the affected joint. The joint is sore to the touch and may or may not be warm to touch, depending on how deep the infection lies in the joint. So the children even develop at times with nausea and vomiting. That has to be looked into. So child has septic arthritis, he or she may complain of fever. The parents will be presenting a high fever of around 102 Fahrenheit or more. Generally not feeling well, the malaise, severe pain in the joint, loss of appetite, inability to use the affected joint, swelling, tenderness, and the warmth of the joint. So the septic arthritis can be difficult to diagnose in the early stages of progression. Once purulence has developed and the bulging effusion is noted, diagnosis is made easily. Typically, the patient presents with a fever and a joint that is hot, red, painful, distended, and has a marked decreased range of movement. So, this are all the inflammation features. Restriction of the movement occurs to active and passive items. The patient doesn't let you touch the joint. In young sexually active patients with fever, tenosynovitis, migrated polyarthralgia, and dermatitis, suspect this gonorrhea there in those patients. The rash may appear as papules over the trunk and extensor surfaces of the distal extremities that eventually can turn into hemorrhagic pustules. Women are more likely to develop gonococcal arthritis than the men. In patients with history of intravenous drug use or drug abuse, the culprit is Pseudomonas. That should be all the candidiasis. Candida and the Pseudomonas are highly suspicious for those who are intravenous drug abusers. In infant children, diagnosis can be very difficult. Neonates and infants often have blunted inflammatory signals. Symptoms such as fever, decreased appetite, irritability, which I told you, without obvious joint movement can easily lead to an incorrect diagnosis. Aside from the obvious open fractures, foreign object and trauma, searching for distant resections is very important. Clinical presentation in the older children will be similar to that in the adult. However, the child may not allow the affected joint to be touched and sometimes may not even allow the affected joint to be seen. So most of the times when there is a severe swelling pain, there is with the pyrexia, 99% which I have also come through, the patient doesn't let you touch the joint. Additionally, confounding symptoms may be present, including nausea, vomiting, headache, sore throat, abdominal pain. Ear infection are the most common source of bacteria leading to septic arthritis in the children. Otitis. So, distinguishing the transient synovitis from septic arthritis is an area of particular concern. History of fever, non-weight bearing, arthrosis segmentation rate, WBC count will be higher. This all should be taken into account. If rapid improvement is not achieved with a needle aspiration, open drainage and lavage or arthrotomy is strongly recommended. So most of the cases we go for the arthrotomy, opening of the joint immediately and drainage of the pus. If it is not done, that is gonna cause septicemia and even septic shock. Even the mortality can be there because of the septic arthritis. So most preferred would be the arthrotomy at the earliest, lavage of the joint, then put him on the antibiotics, follow up, prevent the recurrence. So contraindication, generally few contraindication to arthrocentesis exist. Avoid aspirating from an area that has established over the soft tissue infection. So if you are going to aspirate, means when you have done the investigations of the X-ray or the ultrasound or possible MRI, if you are seeing just is directly communicating with the joint, you are doing aspiration for cultural anything, it's one issue. But if you are seeing that there are multiple locules between the skin and the joint, at the level of the synovium and above the synovium, they are seeing the locules or clusters of this sacs of pus. If you are going to try to put a needle down there and remove it, you're going to bust up all those things and spread the infection. So in those cases, the arthrocentesis is not advisable. Okay, that should be kept in mind. So directly go for arthrotomy and layer by layer keep resetting, remove the infected part, the pus drainage, arthrotomy, so that you're not going to introduce anything into the joint or from the joint to the surrounding structures. So you're not going to cause any iatrogenic spread of infections. So that should be kept in mind when you are dealing with the septic arthritis cases. So you have to build up the immunity of the patient. Means the patient, if he is in shock, you have to give the IV fluids, and the patient won't improve because without the surgery, most of the cases which even I have gone through, because whatever drugs you are giving, because there is infected pus around, they won't be normal circulation reaching that part, because that has been cornered away from the healthier circulation and healthier tissues, and that has formed colonies and that's spreading out. That's causing a systemic reactions down there. So once you have done the debridement, the by arthrotomy lavage is done, then when you are giving your antibiotics, the appropriate antibiotics and the medicine, they reach down to that side, they see to that there is no growth of the bacteria there, and the patient recovers very fast. So that should be kept in mind. And even the hemophilia patients should be taken into account. But if suddenly the patient is of sickle cell anemia, then there will be obviously splenomegaly and that issues. Again, you should keep sufficient blood around. You should be keeping this bleeding clotting time in mind. So the patient with bleeding disorders and those who are on anticoagulant medications pose a difficult challenge, and this must be weighed against the benefits on an individual basis. So the lab studies, CBC with the differential often reveals the leukocytosis, erythrocyte segmentation, C-reactive protein are high, key monitoring of the case. Blood cultures may be positive to 50% of Streptococcus aureus infections, and the very poor in detecting the visceral gonorrhea. The urethral, cervical, pharyngeal, and rectal cultures. much higher yield for the N. gonorrhea than the blood cultures. So if you suspect about the visceral gonorrhea, okay, sexually transmitted ones, then the urethral, cervical, the pharyngeal, the rectal cultures are significant for any chance of this good growth than the blood cultures for this gonorrhea, dysentery. Cellular fluid analysis, the Gram stain, the culture, the cell counts, the crystal analysis, cellular fluid classification. So the imaging studies, plain radiography, anti-posterior views, or special X-rays. Radiography may be helpful when considering hip involvement in younger children. Look for the soft tissue swelling around the joint, widening of the joint space, displacement in the tissue planes. In later stages of progression, look for the bony erosions and joint space narrowing. Even this X-rays will be helpful for you in the follow-up. What you take initially, and later, after the treatment is in progression and continuous follow-up, you will be seeing how the affected joint is in comparison with the opposite giant, what treatment was taken, what should we take a decision of, or how is the growth, or the physis is injured, or what is the growth response. Everything can be compared. So the X-ray is a must because the superior investigations like the CT scan, for the more MRI are there. They will only be giving you the instant message of what's at the time. But for you, for regular follow-up, you can't be asking the patient for MRI every month or every 4 weeks or every CT scan if required. You can't be doing that. So the X-rays are very helpful. So even the ultrasonography in the initial time will be helpful for you to see if where is the plane of the swelling, where all it's spread, in the muscular planes, in the joint level, the synovial level, the hypertrophy, all is loculated, multilocular, or synovitis is there, how much is the level of the soft tissue involvement, the abscess, whether the size or any vascular supplies present for it involvement. So everything you can be doing for the ultrasonography initially, and based on that again, you can be asking for the MRI scan, which will be giving a bigger figure for you. So the nuclear scanning, the study is helpful to differentiate the transient synovitis from the septic arthritis. As I told you, the needle aspiration should be avoided when they are finding under the skin multiple block-related ones. The careful one. So it's a poor choice for the joints with loculations. So medical therapy, administration of fluids, antibiotics, proper drugs. In special situations, warrant modification of the antibiotic treatment. For example, in patients who are hospitalized with suspected methicillin resistance, that's MRSA, methicillin resistance, yes. IV vancomycin would be an appropriate regimen in patients with suspected pseudomonas or IV drug abusers. In IV amyloid in combination with an anti-pseudomonal cephalosporin will adequately treat this organ. Patient with prosthetic joints or intra-articular infection and subsequently infected joints are highly susceptible to MRSA. Okay, as well as the Helicobacter pseudomonas. In cases, IV vancomycin with ciprofloxacin or the amyloid do wonderful results. So as I told you, the surgical therapy that is a cornerstone for the successful treatment. As Staphylococcus aureus is the most prevalent and most virulent organism, rapid destruction of the joint process quickly without drainage. Radial aspiration can serve as an initial diagnostic and therapeutic intervention in many cases. If a rapid improvement is not achieved, open drainage and lavage, orthoscopically or by arthrotomy, is strongly recommended. So the orthotomy is the best procedure for bacteria deeply embedded in the joint and for loculations, especially helpful for drainage of the shoulders and the hips. And orthoscopically, it is good for the decompression of the elbows, knees, and ankles. But the best of all would be the orthotomy, open orthotomy, which you have done it for the joint environment lavage. So post-operatively, non-weight bearing to be maintained. We have to improve the immunity, appropriate drugs are given. And As the patient is recovering, improving, they should be assisted ambulation if it's in the lower limbs. The sprinting should be appropriate to that. Isometric exercise will be started as a strengthening to prevent the joint contractures. So complications are the irreversible destruction of the joint occurs in large percentage of patients require proper treatment. Major complications of the cancer include degenerative joint disease, soft tissue injury, osteomyelitis, fibrous plus bony ankylosis, sepsis, and death. So that's done for today. It's okay.